Welcome to Not in a Huff with Jackson Huff, where we interview newsmakers, storytellers, and all-around interesting people. Sit back, relax, unless you're driving, and enjoy the show. Here's Jackson.
Hello. I am Jackson Huff. This is Not in a Huff. Thanks so much for joining me. As always, really appreciate it. This week I'm speaking with Jaimie Beebee. Now, Jaimie, a ton of stuff going on. I think that, I've talked to people with a lot on their plate and a lot of different things. I even talked to a guy who did marketing, had marketing books, and also talked about the Shroud of Turin. So definitely mixed some interesting stuff. But this week might stretch out to the limits because we're going to talk to Jaimie about her day job, her career as a casting director and what that looks like. We're going to talk to her about her podcast that she's a host of called Strictly Stalking. So we're going to talk about the true crime world of stalking. And she's going to give us some interesting stories about that, stories that she's had on her podcast, some really terrifying stuff. What made her want to create a podcast about stalking and what she's learned from it and how she just deals week in and week out listening to people's stories, what she hopes the future holds. She hopes that eventually the podcast is not needed, but that the laws are not where they need to be in protecting people now. There's tons of stories out there. The day that there's not a story for her to cover, I think would be a good day. So, but until then, her podcast is really, really awesome. So we've got casting director, we've got stalking, and then her last part is she actually owns a bikini company. So yeah, stalking, bikinis, and casting director. Quite a array of things we're going to talk about. Her bikini company is called The Boyfriend Bikini. There's a pretty cool message behind it. The people that she hires to make the bikinis, the franchise opportunities that she wants to create eventually. It all has a pretty inspiring thought behind it. So I think you're going to enjoy this. The bulk of the conversation, I think, is probably in the podcast world. This is a podcast, so of course we want to talk about hers. But it's a very different kind of podcast. It's a podcast that, has to do with a very intense, meaningful topic every single week. Not to say this podcast isn't meaningful, because it certainly is. But we have a wide variety of people on talking about some of their best moments and their most exciting moments, where Jaimie has to talk to people sometimes about their most terrifying moments, the worst moments of their life. So, I give Jaimie a lot of credit for covering them with the respect, honesty, and compassion that she does. I think you're going to enjoy this conversation. Awesome person. Really appreciate her time. Here is Jaimie Beebee. I'm here today with Jaimie Beebee. Miss Beebee, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. We just talked before we started recording. You've got so many different things going, but just introduce yourself.
Well, my name's Jaimie, and yes, I do have a lot of things going. I am a casting director. I've been a casting director for, like 15 years, around 10 to 15 years. And I have a true crime podcast called Strictly Stalking that I've been doing for the last 3.5 years. And I just started a bikini company called The Boyfriend Bikini that I launched on Valentine's Day of this year.
I love it. We're gonna talk about each and every one of those. Let's start with the casting director part. I looked at your, oh goodness, what is it? IMBD. What? So I don't exactly know what a casting director is. I've talked to people from all walks of life when it comes to making movies: producers, stuntmen, directors, actors, all that kind of stuff. Never a casting person. Does being a casting director get you? I'm going to mess up the letters again. IMBD, or have you done other
IMDb
stuff?
Yeah, it is all on IMDb. And honestly, I didn't know what a casting director did either until I started doing it. I had never even been on a set. I didn't know anything about production when I started in production. I had met a guy that I was dating at the time, and he wanted to be a director and have a production company. And I think I was doing real estate at the time, didn't really know what I wanted to do. I was kind of trying everything. And he was like, why don't you manage it? You can run the company. I was like, great. I have no idea how to do that. So I started Googling it. I learned everything I could about production and producing things. And I think a good thing to always remember is if you don't know what you're doing, hire people that do and try and learn from them. So that's what I did. And I worked with him for a couple of years, doing mostly commercials and little things like that. And then when that disbanded, I realized that casting was kind of the best part of the job. Everyone's happy to hear from the casting director. Everyone likes the casting director. Everyone's nice to the casting director. I was out there handing out jobs pretty much. So I wanted to do that. And it's really hard to get into casting for TV and film, which I didn't really realize at the time. Most people work under people for a long time, intern and things like that. And, I had way too many bills to pay to do that. So I jumped into casting for reality shows, like unscripted casting, which is really, really easy. I mean, there's definitely it takes some time to learn it, but once you do, it's pretty simple. You're just looking for real people that are kind of willing to, I guess, be exploited on TV for one reason or another. And so it's easy to jump into that. So I did, and I did really, really well at it. And I liked it for a little while, but morally, it wasn't really for me. I realized that a lot of these people that I was convincing to go in these shows, after the show, they had shitty lives. I mean, there was a lot of drug addiction and suicide rates were high, depression, all these kinds of things. And I think part of that is because of the people that we choose to put on TV. Everyone kind of wants to see a disaster unfold in one way or another. And then also, you take some 18, 20-year-old kid and from West Virginia, from a town of 300 people, and you put him on TV and make him, quasi-famous for 15 minutes, it's going to have some repercussions, especially in the way that we do it, here in the States and other countries as well, where we do kind of exploit them. So after a while, I was like, I really don't want to do this anymore. And so in the meantime, I had started going to the universities and film schools in town, and I would stand outside and ask people if they needed a casting director. And it worked. People were like, yeah, sure, why not? Because no one really is doing casting, especially, at the film school level. Sometimes I'd, make $100 or something. But what that did was, I got to know all the agents and managers, and I got those relationships, which were really important. And then when the kids started graduating from school, they were getting bigger and better jobs. And I was the casting director that they knew. So I kind of expanded up with them. And eventually I was able to leave script or unscripted casting and go into scripted.
That's awesome. And that kind of leads into even more questions about exactly what a casting director is, because from what I understood, you're working with, the production company or the show, and you were doing the casting. So what exactly were you doing? You were being the casting director for these individual students. I just don't know exactly what a casting director is. So explain that a little bit.
No problem. So for scripted, for TV and film, there's a couple different ways to go about casting. It kind of depends on the budget that you're working with. If you're working with a bigger budget, more than likely they have an idea on who they already want to be in the show. So we're making offers, and those offers go to the agents and managers. And that's pretty simple in some ways. You really have to have those relationships with agents and managers in order to get them to respond and take you seriously and take a look at the information that you're sending. And so making an offer, it's just what it sounds like. We decide who we want. I find out when they're shooting, how many days they're shooting. We come up with a number that we think the actor would go for, which is, everyone kind of has their set numbers. We look at what they made in their last film or, so whatever it is, what they normally make. And that's kind of around what we try to offer. And then, hopefully they take it. Usually there's some negotiations involved, and then hopefully we can finalize something on negotiations and they jump in and do the movie or the TV show. And then if it's not a higher budget show and we're looking just for maybe actors that aren't at that level yet, we'll either do in-person auditions or self-tape auditions where we send them, a couple pages of whatever it is, and they act it out and send it back. If it's a self-tape, or they do it in the room. And then, that narrows down our choices, and we're able to choose that way.
I got you. So how are you being a casting director for an individual student then? That's what I'm trying to figure out.
Right. So students, when they go through school, they do have to make like short films, or sometimes even full-length films, or maybe they're shooting a music video for their friends, or fake commercial or real commercial. They could be shooting anything, but you need people to shoot if you're going to shoot something. And a lot of times they will try and get their friends to do it, other film students, but that's not always possible. Or maybe it's for, they want to shoot something for, to send out to, for their reel or whatever else, and they want kind of a name in there. And there's a lot of big actors, recognizable actors that will do student films for nothing, or, the smallest amount, just to help students out, because, that's our future, are the students and new people coming in all the time. It's a different level of creativity. It's everything's new and exciting. So so I'll help them find somebody to put in their student film or their commercial or music video or whatever it is that they're shooting.
No, that makes sense. That makes sense. So you said it kind of in the beginning, but how long have you been in this casting world?
10 to 15 years.
Yeah. So since the beginning, do you think it's been easier or harder to take this role? And the reason I ask that is I talked to someone who has been a voiceover actor for, 30 plus years. And he said that it's getting harder and harder because there's always been a ton of voiceover actors, but the ones that are on the A list, it's getting larger and larger and larger and harder to book jobs. And if he hadn't been in it for 30 years and he was just really good at it at this point, it'd probably be difficult to actually break in, even being good, because there's just too many. Obviously, there's always been a ton of actors. There's, that's always been a thing. But do you think that it's getting harder or easier to do your job in the last 10 or 15 years?
I think it's easier personally, because everything changes with technology. I can see where, especially voice actor would be harder, because anyone can do voiceover now. With the technology we have today, I can sound like anything. It's you can do it online now with AI and everything else, which is like a whole new level. So I think with technology, it opens a lot of doors, but it can also shut a lot of doors. It makes it a little bit harder because anybody anywhere can do this work. It really opens it up. You don't have to be living in LA, going to all the auditions. We do most of it online now, especially after COVID and lockdown. I do 98% of my work online, remotely.
Yeah. Well, we could easily talk about this the whole podcast. I've had people on that just talk about, just their role in movie making. So, but we're moving on because you've got so much else going on. I want to talk about your podcast, Strictly Stalking. Give us the premise of that if somebody's listening, and then exactly how it all came about, how you got into a podcast about such an interesting topic.
Sure. So what we interview victims and survivors of stalkers on the show. We kind of hand the platform over, and do a quick interview, not quick, I guess it's about an hour long. And, the survivor tells what happened, what happened to them, if they're still being stalked, which a lot of times they are, or if they got justice, which hopefully they did. A lot of times they didn't. The laws just aren't there yet. And, anyone anywhere can be stalked. It's not famous people. It's not just women. It's not just men. And you can be stalked by anyone. You can be stalked by your husband, your ex-husband, your brother, your mom, a stranger from the post office, a stranger that walked by your house and saw you outside. Like, it's literally anyone anywhere at any time can be a stalker or can be stalked. So yeah, and how we got into it. I have a business partner, my co-host, Jake Tula. I really wanted to do a podcast because I listen to podcasts all day. I love true crime. It's totally my thing. I feed on it, And I called him one day and I was like, oh, I want to do a podcast. Everyone's doing a murder podcast. Like, I don't know if there's enough murders to cover anymore, Yeah. Sometimes I hear the same murder show on 3 different podcasts. So I was like, I missed the boat. I can't do a podcast now. And he was like, well, no one's doing a podcast about stalking, and that's like a major thing. And I was like, stalking? I don't know anything about that. I have no idea. Like, that's weird, right? So I hung up the phone and I was like, there's a whole crime I don't know anything about. Like, let's learn about it. So I started researching and I was like, wow, millions and millions of people get stalked. And, sometimes it's horrific. It leads to death. It's extremely traumatic. If you are able to get any type of justice, you're left with a lot of PTSD. There's so much fear. It's terrifying. So I jumped in and we started doing the podcast, and we've done a little over 3 years, like around 200 episodes, and put one out a week. And there's no shortage of stories. We've kind of heard every type of stalker out there. And what we're trying to do is just, give people that voice to help other people, to hopefully change laws, to get that awareness out there. A lot of people don't talk about stalking. It's kind of like an embarrassing, shameful topic for victims to talk about, which is really, it shouldn't be at all. But it kind of goes along, a lot with domestic violence and rape, along those lines of things that we need to create more awareness out of in order to stop what's going on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I wonder too, you said there's no shortage of stories. How do you find your stories? Does people just reach out to you guys, or how are you finding these connections to share the story?
Yeah, people do reach out to us mostly all the time now. Now that the podcast has gotten a lot bigger. In the beginning, I just kind of when I started researching and reading more about the crime and everything, I reached out to advocates of stalking because 99% of the advocates have been stalked. And that's why they've become advocates to help other people, because it's such a weird unknown thing. Like, what do you do if you're being stalked? I had no idea. Like, you can't, like, am I going to call 911 and be like, yeah, my ex-boyfriend left flowers at the door again? Like, they're going to laugh, right? Like, okay, you got flowers, but because there's a way that when you do go to the authorities, you need to document, he left flowers again. He's not supposed to know where I live. He's not supposed to be 100 feet of me. He attacked me 3 days ago. Like, he emails me 100 times a day. He calls and hangs up 100 times a day. Like, you need to tell all those things that lead up to it that show the pattern and that show the fear. So there's a lot that goes into being able to try to get justice. And even then, the laws are not where they should be. But it is kind of word of mouth. A lot of people that have been stalked are looking for resources. So that's how they find us. They start listening, and then, they want to share their story. So that's kind of roundabout how we find people.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. And I wonder too, I mean, obviously a lot of these people are coming to you, or they're already public with their story, but how do you bring these people on, and I guess, and put them at ease? A lot of times, in this podcast, I talk to people that are, actors or a lot of kind of fun things. Occasionally I talk to people that aren't, I've delved into true crime before as well, but those conversations always take just a little bit more because, I don't want to say anything triggering by any means. So how do you deal with that balance?
Yeah, no, it is difficult. There's a lot of things that we do have to look at when we interview people. And a lot of our guests come on anonymously because they are still being stalked. It would be very dangerous for them to give out any information. So we record everything ahead of time, and then we edit everything just in case, someone says some kind of identifying information. And And we don't ever say the stalker's name for safety reasons, but also because it's not the stalker's story. We want to take that narrative away. And stalkers want attention. We don't want to give them attention. So a lot of people do come on anonymously for that reason. We also talk to people before the interview. We have like kind of a pre-interview that we do where we discuss what they want to talk about, what they want to say, how in-depth they want to get. There's so many aspects of stalking. You know, a lot of people, it starts with domestic violence, they leave their partner, and then the person stalks. So like, you know, we ask them what they want to talk. If they want to talk about the domestic violence, do they not? You know, we really leave it up to our guests on how comfortable they are with what they're saying, if they want to be anonymous, if they want their name out there or not. But again, we don't say the stalker's name unless there's been a couple times where the stalker is deceased or in prison for a lengthy amount of time, or it's a very famous case. Then sometimes we'll say their name, but we really try to avoid that.
Yeah, I understand that for sure. And I want to ask you too, you've had over 100 episodes, you've covered so many different stalking cases. Any of them, just to kind of for the listener to understand what's happening, any of them maybe that you can highlight that were just particularly interesting in either the way they were stalked or who was being stalked or anything like that? Anything that you can kind of highlight for the listener here?
Sure. There's one that always comes to mind, is the creepiest one. This girl, she was younger. She just moved out of her house, her parents, and was going into college and had moved into her own apartment for the first time, living alone. She had like a medium-sized dog or something. And she was going out, have, classes, going out with friends, just living the life. And she started noticing that underwear was missing from her apartment, which she thought was weird. Like, did she lose it in the laundry? Like, who knows? You don't really think too much of it. She didn't really think too much of it. And then she noticed like some of her swimwear was like things kept going missing out of her apartment. And she wasn't really having a lot of people over, but like maybe one of her friends was taking it. It was a joke. Someone was playing a joke on her. She didn't know. And then it turns out one day she wakes up and she has no underwear left, and anywhere in her, it's all gone. Everything is, it's gone. Which is really strange. So she kind of reached out to her friends and family and was like, hey, this happened. Like, did somebody do this? Like, is this a joke on me? Couldn't figure it out. And then there was something wrong with the electricity in her apartment, and her landlord came over and she had previously talked to, I think it was like a cop friend of her mom's, and they looked in the house and they were like, doesn't seem like anyone's breaking in, like, So the landlord comes over and they go in her closet, and there's like one of those little attic things up in the closet where you can go check on things. And she didn't even know that was there. So they opened it up and realized that someone had been living in there. There was, like pictures of her, there were her things, and it was obvious that someone had been like living in her attic. And he wasn't there at the moment. So they were like, okay, this is not good. And it turns out it was a guy that was living on the other side of the apartment complex. So he would go up through his closet and then make his little way all the way to hers. And he had been going for like days at a time. He had a wife and family, but he was gone for days at a time. I don't really understand how his wife and family didn't know where he was, but whatever. And they did end up arresting him. And I think he got deported. But it kind of terrified the crap out of me. Like, someone living in your house and you don't know, but that actually happens more often than you'd think. So living in the basement, living in the attic, like really scary stuff.
That's terrifying for sure. And that's kind of a good lead into the next question. You said that it terrified you to hear this story. Week in and week out, you're hearing these stalking stories and things that are pretty awful. So how do you deal with, listen to this every week? And I feel like that can be traumatizing just in itself.
It is a little bit. I think that I'm at a place in my life where I'm like good to understand that kind of trauma. what's interesting is when I first started at the podcast, I would get triggered really easily by a lot of the domestic violence stories because I had just left an abusive relationship. And so like I think people kind of thought that I was very cold in the interviews, which it wasn't really that. It was more like I was hearing my story over and over again from all these people. And it was something that I hadn't talked about, out of fear, out of, everything else, because a lot of people don't talk about domestic violence. So up until, probably about a year ago, when I finally started talking about being in an abusive relationship is when it really opened up for me. So I think it really helped, as much as it was triggering and like emotionally draining to hear people's stories. I think ultimately it helped me personally so much to hear all these stories. And also, for my podcast, I'm asking people to talk about the worst parts of their life. So, if I'm asking other people to do that, I should be able to do that too. So that's when I started talking more about what I went through, and it all kind of started coming together a little bit, and it helped me heal. So it was really, really hard to kind of hear my story, over and over, because most domestic, violence is very similar to one another. It's like they read a book and do the same things over and over. But ultimately it did help.
Yeah. So when you're doing this podcast, do you go into a studio? Or are you sitting on your couch like you are now, or what's that look like?
Yeah. I do it from home. I travel a lot. So I actually do it from wherever I'm at. 99% of my work I can do remotely. So I do, as long as I have internet, I can work. So I've done interviews from many countries, all through Europe, South America, Central America, Asia. And yeah, wherever I'm at, I just need my computer and a microphone.
That's awesome. I want to ask now, given, this is a podcast too, just the awkward nature that I could see this being, because, I have people reach out and want to be a guest relatively frequently. I have agents reach out and trying to, have some of their clients on. And it's easy for me when they're trying to, sell a certain book or talk about, something that I don't necessarily want to bring on, just to say, that's not right for this podcast. Or, I maybe at a later date, when people reach out to you, they're telling you their maybe their scariest experience, but it's not right for your podcast, or maybe you've covered that same type of thing many times. How do you say no to these people? I feel like that would be harder.
It's actually very rare that we've said no. Very few times, because if they've heard the podcast, they know what it's about. It's just about stalking. So if you've been stalked, we definitely want to hear the story. And we've heard some stories that are a much lighter form of stalking, and some like where the person was kidnapped by their stalker, So we go all across the board, because overall it's the same amount of trauma. It's the same amount of fear. It's that not knowing what your stalker is going to do next. And also, whatever type of stalking it is, it's going to, if you tell your story, it's going to help somebody out there, because someone else is dealing with it too. And a lot of stalking stories are similar, but they're never the same. They're always similar, but they're never the same. And also, like, in how people reach out and deal with like the police and, the story in that way, it's always very, very different too. So we rarely say no. Sometimes if we feel that people are in too much danger to tell their story, we'll wait until we can maybe help them, get a hold of lawyers or police or, some other resources first, because we never want to put anyone in danger. Safety is the most important thing. So we feel like, if their story is something where, even if they're anonymous, it could hurt their safety, we'll say no to that, but we'll usually be helping them in the meantime. And then hopefully they can tell their story once they are not in any danger any longer.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense for sure. I want to ask you, kind of in wrapping up with the podcast, what do you hope the future holds for the podcast? You've been doing it for a while. Do you have any, I don't know, dream guest, which sounds a little interesting given the nature of the podcast, but any dream guest? Do you have kind of an end in mind? Do you plan on doing it until there's no stories left, or just talk about the future of the podcast?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to do it until there's no stories left. I wish that was tomorrow,
Yeah.
but it's not going to be,
Right.
unfortunately. I think that we're gonna have stories for years and years. I think that we are making a lot of headway. I think that we're helping a lot of people. So I don't see any end in sight, especially because of that. Until the laws are all changed, and even once the laws change, they'll just have to keep changing because of technology and everything else. People are finding new ways to stalk. Crime is never going to stop. So I don't see it. I don't see us stopping due to not having stories or anything like that. Unfortunately. And yeah, I'd like to just keep going until we can make as much of a difference as possible in people's lives, and also create that awareness. It should be perfectly fine to talk about, your trauma, whatever that is, because once you have that awareness, then we can start putting a stop to it. More people talk about, abuse in any way. Abuse is a very shameful topic, I guess. Unfortunately, there's a lot of victim shaming. It's something that's really hard to talk about. So I would love to see it where it's not so hard to talk about, because as soon as that happens, there will be less of it. The more people talk about it, the less it's going to happen. Like one way or another, we'll get there. So
Yeah. Yeah. And another thing I just thought about, because this very rarely happens with this podcast, because of course a lot of people are promoting a certain thing when they come on, but in your podcast, people are talking about, we've already talked about this, they're some of their scariest situations and something maybe that they're still living. So how often is it that you talk to somebody, you start the process of, creating an episode, and then somebody's like, never mind, I thought I was ready for this, but I'm not, just because on my end that happens rarely, but when it does, I'm like, it's a totally different world than yours, but I'm thinking, we spent all this time talking, and now, I've edited it, and that's a little bit unfortunate.
yeah, that actually happens. Not a lot, but frequently for us. And it's just part of what we have to go through. They're going through something much worse. So for us to scrap an episode, fine. We'll scramble and find something else to talk about. It's not, safety first is always our thing. And usually if they've decided they don't want to come on the episode, especially after they've recorded it, it's usually a safety issue. And, we always tell them, like, well, we have the episode. If you change your mind, let us know. If you want to redo it, let us know. But yeah, that does happen. Or, their stalker gets out of prison unexpectedly. We can't run the episode. I totally get that. We don't want to put anyone in danger. And there's been times where, they start out like, oh yeah, I'm going to use my name. And then, after we do it, they change their mind. That's fine. We beep it out. Like, no big deal,
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And it's just it's a totally different world there, but I knew that you'd had to have dealt with that before. Let's transition into the last part, because you haven't already talked about enough amazing things that you do. Let's talk about your company. I believe it's a bikini company. How'd that come about?
It is. Well, that kind of came about a little more interestingly, I guess, than the other things. I mean, I always wanted a bikini company. I love bikinis. I love being in tropical weather. I love wearing bikinis. I'm always in one. So after my abusive relationship ended, which thankfully was right before COVID, because I know a lot of people were stuck with their abusers during COVID. Thank God I wasn't. A lot of people died because of that. That's kind of the ending of abuse for a lot of people, unfortunately, is death. But I luckily got out right before COVID on Valentine's Day of 2020. So I started kind of checking off a list in my mind of all the things that he had said I couldn't do, which was quite a bit. He didn't think very highly of me. So, like, I started the podcast. I traveled the world solo. I've gone to, God, I don't know, 20 different countries by myself, countries where men I know are like, I would never go there alone. I'm like, oh, it's great. I have no problem. I've done so many things. So one of those things that I knew that I wanted to do was start that bikini company. So mid to late last year, I reached out to a girl that I'd found online who does patterns. She's going to school in Paris for design because I really didn't know how to make a bikini. But I knew what I wanted it to look like. I feel like I'm pretty experienced in bikini wearing. I reached out to her and she helped me design, helped me with the design, made the pattern, everything. And then I went to Bali and I found a company there, a manufacturing company that I really liked. They ethically produce the bikinis and they let people work from home, which is different than most people don't get to do that there. Things are a little bit different over there. But that way, we gave them a deadline, we gave them the sewing machines, and that way they were able to spend time with their family. They weren't, had to work from this hour to this hour and couldn't leave and, got one bathroom break. I think that is horrible way to work. No one wants to work like that. And I wanted the bikinis to be made, with some kind of happiness involved. So I went out there and it was great. I met everybody and everyone was really cool, picked up my first shipment and launched it on Valentine's Day of this year. So 3 years later, from when I escaped my relationship, and it's going pretty good. I named it the Boyfriend Bikini because I actually wanted to name it the ex-boyfriend. I had a lot of anger, a lot of anger and resentment towards that person. I was with him for 7 years. It was a really horrible relationship. So I wanted to name it the ex-boyfriend. I was like, oh, I'm going to make money. And he said I couldn't and all this, whatever. And my friend at the time, she was like, why would you want to, put such a negativity on something that you're so excited and happy about, this dream of yours? I was like, oh man, you're right. So I decided how can I turn all my anger into something positive? So I decided to call it the Boyfriend Bikini. And then each style and color is named after a type of guy, but a positive influence. And it's very personal to me. So when you get there's one, it's called there's one called Puppy Love. My dog's a boy, I named it after my dog. There's one called First Love. It's named after kind of my first boyfriend who was awesome. We're still great friends. And I tell kind of this story of not only my first love, but I think a lot of people's first love, or the story of how much I love my dog. So when you order bikini, you get not only the bikini, but you get the actual story. I've typed it all out and everything. You can read about the stories online too. Because I did want to make it something more positive. And then just for that added push, for me personally, in order to help other people, part of the proceeds goes to the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence so that I can give back. And then what I'm hoping is if I can get, the company big enough off the ground, what I'd really like to do is be able to kind of franchise it to women that are coming out of shelters. Because when you come out of a shelter, it's most of the time you go back to your abuser because you don't have money, you don't have a place to live, you have nothing. You might have kids or there's all these things, you're just screwed. So I'd like to be able to give back to those women. I know how hard it is. I was very lucky in the fact that I owned the house that this person was living in. So I just kicked him out and locked the door, called the cops, locked the door, the whole thing. But a lot of people don't have that choice. So I really want to be able to grow this thing to be something that these women coming out of shelters can hopefully, climb onto and sell some bikinis and just get off, be able to get up there and have their own place and do their own thing and not go back to their abuser.
Yeah, I think that's a powerful thing for sure. And you talk about franchising it. What's that exactly mean? I assume that a lot of these things are being bought online rather than brick and mortar. So what's it mean to franchise? Are you just kind of, I don't know a good word for it, having individuals sell it by a catalog? I feel like the dirty word, which I'm not meaning it to be, are you trying to triangle market this with people under you, or what do you mean?
Well, what I don't really know what that looks like now. I'm kind of trying to figure that out. But what I'd like to do is say they come up with their own design of a bikini. Because I have basically one specific design. Let's say, this woman's oh, I want to do a one piece. This is really, I have this idea. So I would use, the money from the company to make that design. And, get it all manufactured and everything like that. And then, take a percentage because it would be under my company name. But then that specific bikini line they can sell it brick and mortar if they somehow can, or online or whatever. And then they would get the rest of I would take enough percentage to make the money back on what I spent, but then they would get the actual proceeds of it.
I love that. That makes a lot of sense. So we've covered a lot. We kind of just little snippets of everything. If people want to learn more about you, I mean, I guess in your casting world, definitely learn more about your podcast, learn more about the bikinis. Shout out how people can connect with you and all the great things you got going.
Sure. So my personal Instagram is feathergirl77. It's all my day-to-day stuff and lots of my traveling. The podcast is at Strictly Stalking Pod on Instagram and TikTok. And then the bikini company is The Boyfriend Bikini on Instagram. And then I also have a website, www.theboyfriendbikini.com.
I love it. Well, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Yeah, it was great. Thanks so much for having me on.
So that was Jaimie Beebee. Learned so much, just a wide variety of topics. I don't think I've ever mixed such different things together. I think that, that just shows how amazing Jaimie is, that she juggles all these things and is so successful at all of them. So I've always had an interest in learning about movies. Just another aspect of that when it comes to casting directors. I learned a lot there. We've dabbled in true crime in the past in this podcast. So to talk about the world of stalking, which, this whole time I think I say stalking, it's stalking or stalking. It's hard for me to say exactly right. So I'm glad that isn't my podcast for a whole host of reasons, but one, because I don't say the word right, I don't believe. So I learned so much from her about this and just about the issues when it comes to providing proper protection for people who are dealing with this. There's not enough laws out there to protect oftentimes the women that are dealing with this. Of course there's men and women, but a lot of the time that it's women being stalked by somebody who's become infatuated with them or an ex or all that kind of stuff. So I do think that there's a significant oversight there, and the work that Jaimie's putting in to bring that to the forefront, bring that to light, and spread awareness, I think is really, really awesome. She is awesome when it comes to the bikini line as well, and just talking about the messages behind that and who she's having create the bikinis. I think it's really, really amazing. She's got so much amazing stuff going on. If you want to go check her out, I will put a link in the show notes to her podcast, her Instagram, and to her bikini line. Go give love to all three of those. She would greatly appreciate that. With this podcast, go follow us on Instagram, Not Enough Podcast, jacksnuff.com. You can check us out. Not Enough with Jack Snuff on Facebook. All those areas. Really appreciate you following along so you can see future guests. I'm going to cover that in just a moment, but also, if you like this episode, leave a 5-star review on Apple and on Spotify. Appreciate that very much. Leave a written review on Apple, even more amazing. But whatever you do, you're going to want to click that follow button. You're going to want to click that subscribe button, whether you're on Apple or on Spotify. A lot of really awesome guests coming up. Next week's guest is just one that I've been trying to get on for a good little while. It's already recorded, and it was really amazing. Kind of follows in this same world when it comes to true crime and people's interest in it, and when true crime really goes sideways and implicates the wrong people. And I think next week's guest is truly one of the biggest people when it comes to that world. So I think that you're going to really enjoy that. The story's been covered quite a few times, but to actually have the person on is a powerful thing. So I'm going to leave it there because you're going to have to check it out next week. But interested in this topic here when it comes to true crime, you're really going to enjoy next week. So we will see you next week. Take it away, Chris.
This has been Not in a Huff with Jackson Huff. Thank you for listening. Be sure to join us next time, where we will interview another amazing guest who is sure to make you laugh or make you think. Or hey, maybe even both. But until then, keep being awesome.